Howdy. Hey, it's great to see all of you. If we haven't met, my name is Ben, and I just want to let you know that my wife Donna and I love you, and we count it a great privilege to be involved with Breakaway, to pray for you, to cheer you on. It was enormously encouraging for me to get to worship alongside you, and I feel honored to be a part of what I'm believing, and I know the staff of Breakaway is believing, is going to be a night of significance. So if you got a copy of your scriptures, let me read you a couple verses out of Matthew 25. If you don't have it, just listen, I'll read it. Matthew 25. I'm going to start in verse 34. We'll pray and then jump in. Matthew 25, verse 34 says this. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." So, Father, thank you for a few minutes around your word, and thank you for every person here, Father, whether they love you and are so excited to worship you, or whether they're not sure what to think about any of this, and who knows. You know them, and you've given us a moment together. And so I just pray, Lord, you would help us understand your word, but more than that, I pray we would feel your heart tonight, and that our heart would beat in rhythm with yours, and we would care about what you care about. And I can't produce that, so we're asking for your grace. And I want to invite you guys, if you're willing, you take a minute and you pray and ask him. Say, "Lord, please teach me tonight." And then if you would please pray for me, that the Lord would use me and I'd be helpful to you. Well, Father, we love you and we trust you. Use this time, and we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, you've heard it said that we don't get to choose the times in which we live, but we do get to choose how to live with the time that we've been given. And this is your university moment. And what we're going to do tonight is to call you to live this moment in a way that's significant. It's interesting. There's a house right off Pershing Avenue that is beautiful. My wife and I loved it when we lived here. We would always drive by it and go, that would make an awesome office for Breakaway. And I remember a section of it burned and they were renovating it. And so we drove by and the doors were unlocked. So we just kind of walked in, and I guess technically we're breaking and entering. It's hard to say. But as we walked around in this house, it had a bunch of old Aggie gear that was kind of cool, and a bunch of bugs on sticks in little glass cases. It was bizarre. But we were walking around like, man, this place is wild. And we'd go by every now and again. And then there was one time we saw a man in a wheelchair, an elderly fellow sitting in the front yard. So we pulled over and got out and said, "Hey, do you know anything about this house?" And he said, "Yeah, it's my house. My father bought it." And he said, "Yeah, it used to be on campus." "Excuse me?" He said, "Yeah, this house used to sit on the campus of Texas A&M. My dad was a professor of entomology, and then when we bought the house in the 1940s, we had to move it across the street." And he said, "But I remember as a kid, I would exit the doors of my house, and I was on A&M campus, and I would just run around at that time among all the cadets." He said, "I grew up moving around on these fields among the Aggies." He said, "And I remember the day we sat in a theater, and we were watching a movie, and I remember them stopping it and coming out and telling us that Pearl Harbor had been attacked." He said, "And I remember watching these students that he knew so well march off to war. And by the end of it, 20,000 Aggies would head off to fight in World War II. 14,000 as officers, 29 as generals, 7 Aggies given the Medal of Honor, and we now have a memorial student center. And I remember as I heard about that, his experience on campus, I was like, that was what that generation was called to. And they said yes, that in their university moment, they were called to something challenging. And it wasn't just interesting to hear that man's story. It made me reflect on my own, that in my university moment, there were times where my greatest concern was to try to get in that shadowboxing class that was always waitlisted. I'm like, how can I not get in there? But it was fascinating to go, wait a minute, you know what? I may not be living in a moment of war like that, but I want to live my life with consequence. You and I, we don't get to choose the times in which we live. You didn't choose to be the COVID generation on campus. You didn't pick that, but it was given to you. But you do have a choice. How am I going to live with the time I've been given? I talk to my staff about this all the time in DC. Like everybody wants to be, if you're a church leader, you want to be Joshua, leading the people triumphantly into the land of promise. No one wants to be Jeremiah. That God said, hey, the Lord's gonna put his words in your mouth and no one's gonna listen to him. They're gonna hate you and not do what you say and then throw you in a mud hole. No one wants to be Jeremiah, but you don't get a vote. If you wanna walk with God, you don't get to choose the time you live in, but you get to choose what you're gonna do with that time. And so I remember in 2007, I was director here at Breakaway. And I know that dates me, you were 4, I get it. But in that time, 2007, that generation, do you remember that's the year this thing came out? That generation had no idea the level of anxiety that was about to be unleashed on you through the advent of this device, this new toy that was put in their hands. But what they did know, this group of Aggies, was we discovered together that among other things, there was a shelter for battered women in Bryan, and they didn't have enough beds. And so we sat here at Breakaway and said, you know what? Individually, maybe none of us can afford to buy a bed. You're borrowing one. But collectively, we could all purchase some beds together and give these women something they maybe have never had, a night to sleep in peace. And we called the project Shalom, because shalom's the Hebrew word for peace. And peace isn't really a big enough word. You tend to think of the absence of conflict, but shalom means more than that. It's the presence of flourishing. It's the way things should be. And yet the world's not like that. The world's broken. It's a mess. But as the people of Jesus, people who've been touched by the grace of Jesus, healed by him, restored by him, given forgiveness from and cleansing from our shame and promised a future, we are meant to see what our Jesus saw, that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, said, blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called sons of God. That if our King came to bring peace, then we come to do the same. We look for where the fabric of society is breaking and we reweave shalom. That if we want the world to see our King, and they'll do it by acknowledging you must be a son of that God. Why? Because you look like him, because you're agents of peace like him. It is what happens when grace touches you. Those who know grace, show grace. Those who have been loved, love. Those who have been rescued, rescue. And so the people of Jesus want to look like our King. And different generations had different challenges in their day. And as we ran Shalom projects through the years, different generations were handed different challenges. Floods in Houston, the outbreak of war and evacuation in Syria. And now as we looked at Shalom project this year, a different challenge has been put right on your doorstep. And so we want to look tonight at the situation playing out in the world right now. And we want to look at why should we care? You've got enough to worry about. Why would you care? And then we're going to look at what we're going to do about it. So what's the situation we're in? Well, it's simply this, that we're standing in a moment of history. The United States just exited its longest war. The war in Afghanistan began in 2001. That's 20 years ago. Right? So as a nation, we were involved in war in Afghanistan for maybe most of you, your entire life. This is the first time in history that someone could enlist and retire in the military, all during time of war. And I know many men and some women who have been a part of that and combat deployed their entire career. Many Aggies have done that. And this generation served in a way that's historic. World War II lasted 4 years. This war lasted 20, right? And it ended in 2021 during your university moment. And all of us saw what you just saw on that screen. In August of 2021, the world watched the Taliban take over the city of Kabul. That happened 6 months ago. This is very real time. And many of you watched that evacuation on the news. You saw the chaos that ensued as the Taliban took control. I'll never forget watching a scene of mothers handing their babies to soldiers. Think about the distress you have to be in to hand your child to a stranger because you only know one thing, that whatever happens over there is a better outcome than what's about to happen if that child stays with me. I can't imagine being put in that situation. And the situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate. The New York Times reported on it 2 days ago, and they said 95% of Afghans right now currently don't have enough to eat. 9 million are at risk of starvation. And so what happened at the end of the war, you saw it, mass evacuations of Afghans out of their country, and they had to leave not just their home country, but all their possessions behind. Somewhere around 100,000 were removed. Those are historic numbers, incidentally, in your lifetime. And politicians and historians will record and debate, and your children and your grandchildren will discuss this moment in U.S. history. They'll read about it, our longest war, and how we did. We'll all debate it and discuss it, but they'll also read about what did we do about it? What were we doing in that day? And what's fascinating about it and so difficult is in real time, it's hard to get the right information. That's one of the most frustrating things about the world today. It's just so hard to know what's true. And we need information to make informed decisions. Military leaders call it the fog of war, that in the midst of a war, a fog rolls in. It's so hard to get reliable intel about what's going on in the world. And yet, even though life's confusing and information is increasingly hard to parse through, there are moments where the fog rolls away and we can see a moment and a need with clarity, and the only question being asked of us is, what are you gonna do about it now in this moment? What are you gonna do? So the current situation now is that according to the UN, 2.6 million registered Afghans are refugees. They had to flee their home. The United States prioritized about 80,000 for resettlement. World Relief, who we'll talk about a little bit later, reported that roughly 28,000 Afghans are resettled in the US between November and December. World Relief themselves, they helped resettle over 2,000 Afghans since August. They'll do 1,000 in February. It was fascinating for me to live in DC in that moment of chaos, to see many people I knew well, many Aggies that serve in various levels of the government or in the military, were watching people that they knew, people who had served as translators over there, struggle to get out. Many of them were finding all kinds of creative means to just try to extract someone they knew from a difficult and deteriorating situation. I watched it and met many, and it was difficult to know even what to do, and sometimes there was so little you could do. I remember one friend was able to get a family friend out, and they arrived here with nothing, just holding their child. They didn't have an extra pair of clothes, and so we just mobilized to buy them everything we could to set this family and these babies up to win. Right? Now, as I say all that, I know some of us hear that and you go, wow, man, that's crazy. Like, all these people being evacuated, so many of them coming to the States, but Ben, I don't know what that has to do with me. What am I supposed to do with that? Or maybe, and you maybe not want to ask it this way, why should I care? Like, I got enough going on in my life, why should I care about this? Well, I don't know about you, but when I see videos like this, I think about a different moment in history where a massive group of people had to leave a difficult and oppressive situation to go to a new home. It's in the Bible, it's called the Exodus, right? Where a massive humanity had to leave and migrate out of oppression. And when they did that, when the people of God were freed from Egypt and moving toward the promised land, they passed through many other nations. And God wanted those nations to be kind to them. And some were, but most weren't. And so a word starts to show up in the Old Testament and then all through the Bible that can be variously translated. The word means sojourner or stranger or alien or guest. It means a person that lives among a people that are not their relatives. It's someone who's among us, but not one of us, right? They're not from around here. And as such, they don't maybe even have the same rights as us, and they're often dependent upon the hospitality of the region. And so the question comes, if you are one of these strangers or sojourners, how will you be treated by the locals? And the normal human response is either to avoid or exploit, get away from them or use them. I've experienced this. I've traveled to foreign countries where as soon as they found out I was a foreigner, they told me the price of whatever I was about to buy just doubled. Just said it. And I'm like, well, that's terrible, but I appreciate your honesty, right? That they say, hey, you're somebody that I know has money. I can exploit you, so I'm going to do it. But if you have nothing to my advantage, then I don't want to bother with you. It's very common human experiences to those who are in need. And yet it's fascinating. In the book of Deuteronomy, God liberates his people from slavery, and as he's moving them across the desert toward the land of promise, he stops to introduce himself to his people. And in Deuteronomy 10, verse 17, you get God's introduction of himself. He says, let me tell you about your rescuer. Let me tell you who I am. He says, the Lord your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God. I love that. He says, I am the Lord of lords. There's no contest. There's not a bunch of gods duking it out. He's like, I am the supreme being in the universe. That's how it is. And he said, I am not partial and I take no bribes. You can't bribe me and I don't have preferential treatment of the rich. But he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. God is introducing himself to his people. And he says, I'm the God of all gods. There is no rival to me, and you can't bribe me. No one can get me off my justice. And as I look at the sojourner, I love them. That's how I feel. And if you're connected with me, I want you to love them too. That's what he says to us. And as he plants his people in the promised land in Deuteronomy, you see all through it, God begins to speak about these people. What do we do with them? In Deuteronomy 16, God institutes the Feast of Weeks, that every time the harvest would come in, the first week of harvest, you would go out there and you'd see your first bit of grain coming in. It was kind of exciting. The harvest made it, it's gonna arrive. And so in that moment, after 7 days, you would throw a party with everyone in your town, your family, your friends, your buddies. God says, hey, I'm telling you, throw a party as the harvest begins to come in. And he says in Deuteronomy 16:11, and rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter, male servant and your female servant, the Levite who's within your town, the sojourner, the fatherless and the widow who are among you, at the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there. He says, throw a party. And as you do it, invite your friends, invite your families, and don't forget the sojourner and the fatherless and the widow. And in Deuteronomy 24, he says, and as you continue the act of harvesting, he says, and when you reap your harvest in the field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes in your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. God says, hey, as you're harvesting all your crops, if you drop some sheaves, if you forget some grapes, leave them, which I'm sure was very stressful for the type A's. But he said, let me tell you why. He said, I want you to leave it there so the sojourner, the foreigner, the stranger, can have productive things to do. They can work, but they can go and gather what's been provided. That belongs to them. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to provide for you, but it's not all for you. And as I bless you, I want you to bless the sojourner because I love them. And he says at the end of the harvest in Deuteronomy 16, when it's all done, keep the feast of booths. When you've gathered in your produce, the threshing floor and the winepress, rejoice in your feast, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. In fact, God leaves his harshest rebukes in the Bible for those who don't show hospitality to those in need. In Isaiah, he says, when you come before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring no more vain offerings. Your incense is an abomination to me, your new moons and Sabbath and the calling of your convocations. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. He says, stop coming and gathering like this. Now, he's not anti-gathering, he's not anti-worship, but he looks in there and says, you keep doing this, but you spread out your hands, because that's how they would worship and pray. He says, you spread out your hands, but I hide my eyes. Even though you make many prayers, I won't listen because your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and plead the widow's cause. He's saying, he's not saying he doesn't want us to worship. He's saying, but worship of me and care for them is inextricably linked. And so when you come to know me, I want you to know I love you and I accept you. And you don't have to walk with me very long before I turn your eyes to see them. Because I love the sojourner, I love the widow, and I want you to love them too. And so much so that Jesus in Matthew 25, where we started, tells a story about the end of days when God hits the clock on the world and says time is done, and the king begins to evaluate us. He says, I want you to picture the moment. And he pictures heaven like a throne room. He said there'll be a throne, and sitting on it will be the king. And the king will stand up and he'll look at a clientele of people and he'll bless them. And he'll bless them because he'll look at you. And he'll say, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. And at that moment, we will not be standing before the king. We will be on our face before him in his glory. But we will look up and go, I'm sorry, what? When were you naked and I clothed you? When were you thirsty and I gave you a drink? At what point were you, the King of all kings, hungry and I gave you food? When did that happen? And he says, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And so I want you to see the connection when he looks at those who are oppressed and hurt and the sojourner and the foreigner and the widow. He says, when you see them, see me. God wants to tie himself to them so close that he says, when you see them, you see me. And when you care for them, you care for me. That's why we care. Does that make sense? So what are we going to do? That's the question. And here's what's fascinating about it. We're in an interesting moment here at Breakaway. You know, God in his mercy has given us different directors over time. Greg Mott, myself, TA, and now at this moment we're praying about how this is led. And so there was a natural question as we're in this transitional moment with directors, do you do a Shalom project? And I love that the staff here was like, absolutely yes, because there are needs, because there are sojourners, and because we have the possibility of making a difference. Absolutely yes. And so they believe in you. And I do too. And they've done a lot of work to try to figure out how can we make a difference. And I want to present it to you. Are you ready? You up for this? Mild nods of approval. Do you want to make a difference in the world, young people? Have we followed along here yet so far? Oh, look. Is this how we do Aggie games too? I support that touchdown. Let's not be afraid to get excited about what God's doing in the world, shall we? All right. Shalom Project 2021, kids, will partner with two organizations. One is World Relief, which is a known commodity to us, by the way. World Relief, we partnered with them in 2016 during the Syrian refugee crisis, and another organization called the Houston Welcomes Refugees. World Relief is a global Christian humanitarian organization. And here's what I love about them. They exist to equip the local church. They said, we know that the church is the hope of the world, and so we want to come alongside them and equip the people of Jesus and churches to do what God called us to do, to love those who are sojourning among us. Now, again, I know as soon as we talk about this, there's so much politics that gets woven into this. We go, what about this party did? What about what this party did? And what about this? And how dare this person? And I just want to be careful. I don't want to discuss politics tonight because none of us in here are going to make those policy decisions about how our government leads. Someday you will. And we'll be there as the church, Passion City, DC, to help you. But here in this room, we're not making political decisions. But there are people arriving at our shores, and there's primarily children showing up. And however policy should shake out in America, there's some kids with some needs, and we have the power to do something about it. Individually, not much. But together, if we lean in, we can make a huge difference, if you're willing. And so what World Relief has done is they've figured out that they've already settled 2,300 Afghans since August. 1,000 more are coming in February alone. The need is massive, bigger than anything they've experienced here in the States. And so they've kind of taken all that you would need to resettle and find a home and said, you know what, for $10,000, we can resettle a family of 4 to 6 people. $10,000 provides a family with with a number of things. It provides them with housing, basic hygiene, kitchen utensils, pots, pans, cooking, oil supplies, anything they need to set up a home. But it also offers trauma care. Many refugees, unfortunately, are victims of unspeakable physical and sexual violence. And most of them have had no space to grieve or to process or to heal from the horrors they've been victims of. So it provides for their physical needs, but it also provides for their emotional needs and spiritual needs in Jesus' name. So baked into this 10,000 is 1,000 for trauma counseling for families. There's also funds for medical assistance, legal fees, ESL classes, employment services, so they can integrate into being part of society. In DC, I meet a number of people who did this. They served as translators overseas. They're now in the States. And it's some of the most inspiring people I've met in DC are those who have come over and want to be contributing members of society. And what I love about World Relief is saying, let us come alongside you and equip you to succeed in this environment. Right? So the first challenge is to partner with World Relief. And for $10,000, a family can be provided for with all their needs to thrive. The second challenge is an organization called Houston Welcomes Refugees. This is what was fascinating to me. Houston, Texas, will be the site of relocation of more refugees than any other American city and more than most other nations. If Houston were a country, it would rank as the 4th in the world for refugee resettlement. Isn't that fascinating? So many of them are coming to the States. Many of them are already here. Many of them are coming to Houston. And so there's an organization called Houston Welcomes Refugees, and they do a number of things, but they just say their purpose is to welcome refugees with compassion, hope, and honor as they resettle and start a new life in Houston. And so what they do is they provide what's called welcome kits that have essential resources, and then they partner it with educational training and all kinds of critical resources that provide a support system to meet the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of people coming in the name of Jesus. So the second part of the Shalom Project will be providing these welcome kits. Resources for families, anything from kitchen supplies, bathroom supplies, bedding, and it costs about $1,900 for a family of 4 to get one of these welcome kits. And so the staff here, as they looked at this, they said, how do you parse this out? They said, well, $10,000 for a family to do all that is possible through World Relief, $2,000 for these. What if we just tried to hit 5 families and 5 other families with welcome kits? That would kind of shake down to about $60,000. $60,000 would get 5 families fully funded through World Relief, another 5 distributed with these welcome home kits. Which I think you hear that number, and I would say a couple things. One, some of you may go, well, Ben, I'm running the numbers on that. 5 families. You're talking about maybe 40 people. You're talking about thousands, 100,000 displaced, and you want to get us to help 40 people? Like, what difference does that really make? Well, it's fascinating. Donna and I, we were at Passion in January, and a young girl came up to us. She's your age, but she's doing some graduate work in Houston. And she walked up to my wife and said, "Do you remember me?" And my wife said, "Yes," and said her name, which I didn't get permission to say, so I won't. And right away. And I'm trying to figure out what's the situation here. And as they start to discuss it, my wife had met her over in India. Several years ago with the Shalom Project, we had supported an organization called As Our Own. As Our Own went into India with women that were captive in the sex trafficking industry. And they worked with other partners to try to liberate women from sex trafficking, but they realized many of these women are having kids, and the kids stay in these little shelves under their bed. And if you don't get the girls out fast, they end up in the same business. And so this family said, you know what? We're going to try to get you out. But as an immediate response, what we can say is we will take that child and raise her as our own. It's the organization. So a group of Aggies said, that's our moment. This is our university moment. That's our call. And they raised an enormous sum of money to get as many girls out as they could. And my wife flew over to India and led worship at As Our Own and met this girl when she was maybe 5. And here she came up as a university-age student and said, "Do you remember me?" And my wife knew her name right away. And I'm like, how do you do that? What 5-year-old looks the same at 20? But I sat there in that green room and looked at this girl and said, you know what, you're talking about human trafficking is a massive global problem. And you go, what difference does it make? I can show you one. And not just one. By the grace of God, she'll get married, have kids. Those kids will have kids. And a whole family will have a totally different trajectory because some Aggies a few years ago said yes to, yeah, I'm going to get a degree. Yeah, I'm going to get a job. Yeah, I'm going to get an internship. But I'm also going to leverage my life for something that matters. And a family is going to be different because I exist. There was a student who sat in these rooms just like you and heard the same call and said, you know, I can't solve all of this. But there's a big difference. If I can't do everything, that doesn't mean I do nothing. There's this whole middle area called something. If I can't do everything, I'm not going to do nothing. I can do something. And this young man in Aggie like yours is raising 2 kids that he adopted from overseas. And he is making a difference in their family. And Lord willing, in their children, and their children, and their children. You have the chance to change families for generations. And I'd like you to do that. And Lord love them, this staff was coming up with numbers, and I don't know how many of us are here. There's overflow space. If there's 3,000 of you, if 60 grand is about $20 a person, you can do that. Will it solve all the geopolitical issues in the world? No. But you're going to give young women and young men a chance. We're not going to take up money tonight, by the way. So if you're like, oh man, I didn't bring my wallet, or maybe I can slip out of here. When he prays, I am gone. You know, I don't know. But hey, there's no pressure tonight. Right? All we want you to do tonight is leave and pray and say, Lord, how do you want to use me? How can I make a difference? And some of you may hear this and you go, well, Ben, I don't have any money. I'm a college kid. I'm poor. One of my favorite texts from Jesus is Jesus was talking to a group of people, telling them not to worry. And he says, so sell your possessions and give to the poor. And I just love that because he just cuts the argument right out for him. Jesus, I don't have any money. And he's like, oh, that's fine. Just sell some. You're like, okay, all right. Okay, all right. And I got to tell you, sitting in the seats you are now here on this campus, I've seen students sell some clothes. I've seen them make jewelry and bracelets and sell them, make t-shirts and sell them. I've seen guys sell their gaming consoles. And you know what I think of, not to be dramatic, but you know in Schindler's List, when he finally realized life's not the accumulation of things, in Schindler's List, do you remember he starts leveraging his money and his life to rescue people in a time of great need? By the end, he starts looking around and like, why did I keep this ring? Why did I keep this watch? If I could have done this. And his friend had to comfort him, hey man, generations will be different because of you. So I don't want to shame you for having possessions, and you shouldn't feel guilty for living in a land of plenty. But in the midst of that, you have an opportunity to make a difference. And I want you to get a degree. I want you to get a job. I want you to find great friends, meet someone you love. I want you to have a full life. And while you're doing it, I want you to change the world. And you may not be able to solve every problem, but there's some kids who could be in a different place because you exist. And I think for all of us collectively in here, if we leaned forward, a lot of people's lives could change because Breakaway exists. And this is your moment. This is your moment. When I was director, we had a group of students in a Christian organization on campus, Christian business leaders, get a vision for what we were talking about here, a similar calling, except it was Syrian refugees, not Afghans. And so they just got together and pooled their resources and started selling things and gave $9,000. It's amazing. I remember being at the office once and getting a phone call, and they said, are you closed yet? I said, no. No, I go, we just want to make sure. I'm like, well, you know, we're going to leave the office eventually. What time are you coming here? They're like, we're on our way right now. We're running right over. And I'm like, you're running over? Okay. And then I looked up a few minutes later, and it was the A&M track team. And they weren't being metaphoric. They were running. It was like these cross-country guys, all like gazelles loping over. And they came running up, and they were like, we just didn't want to miss our chance to give. And it's amazing to see what a motivated group of believers in Jesus can do to change the world. And I believe you're capable of that. And so here's how this is going to work. I just want you to go home and pray about it. I don't want you to feel shame about this at all. If you're like, I don't want to give, then don't. then don't. The Lord loves a cheerful giver. Don't do it. But I just want you to evaluate your life. Do I want to make a difference, and do I believe this is something I want to make a difference for? Then, Lord, what would you have me do? And I got to tell you, I've seen a sense of agency fill the hearts of some people who said, you know what? I'm going to do something. And I can't solve everything, but when I see chaos in the news, I don't just watch it and go, oh man, that's depressing, and turn it off. I go, that's depressing, and I've been called by God to be a peacemaker, so what am I going to do about it? And you might just change the lives of some people in Jesus' name. But let me close with this. God says, when you see the sojourner, when you see the refugee, when you see the stranger, he says, see me, think about me. But he also says, see you. In Ephesians chapter 2, he was talking about those who don't know Jesus, and I believe there's people in here that you don't. You're just here checking it out and you don't know him. And he's calling a group of people to remember that estate. And he says, remember that at one time you were separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. You weren't part of God's believing community. You were strangers to the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. He said, remember, there was a time where you weren't a part of the house. You were a stranger, and you were outside the house. And because of that, you had no hope because you did not know God. But he said, but in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And then he says in verse 19, so then you are no longer a stranger and an alien. You're a fellow citizen with the saints and members of the household of God. What the believer in Jesus says is, I remember a time where, like all of humanity, we were beautiful in the image of God, but we were broken because of sin, and we were outside. And some of you feel the shame and the cold of being outside. But God sent Jesus Christ to take on all the inconvenience of your shame, all the brutal ugliness of your sin. He took it on himself on that cross, and he bled out his very blood to purchase you. And he says, and what he bought was an open door for you to come home, be a part of my house. No longer outside, no longer in the cold, in the warmth of being part of my family. You are no longer a stranger and an alien. You are a son, you are a daughter, because the grace of Jesus Christ came flowing towards you. That's the offer here today. So if you've never put your faith in Christ, just know this clearly from Breakaway. We don't want to extract anything from you. God has given something glorious to you, the chance to be forgiven and have hope and life, and know the God who made you, because he sent his son to rescue you and turn you from stranger to family. But then for those of us who know grace, we show grace. Those of us who know love, we show love. Those of us who've been rescued, we rescue. And I'm excited to see what God does in our hearts this week as you consider what to do. And next week, as TA comes back and we gather to give together.